2022 has been quite a year, and actually a lot of things sort of slipped my mind. So when I was doing my research, I figured let's go and review 2022 together in the following way. So I just wanted to go over with all of you my top stories of 2022. So these are mainly the ones that I covered. And then also have a look at some indicators of what the economy actually did in 2022. So that is real GDP, so adjusted for inflation. Did we have a good year? Yes or no? Inflation? We had a terrible year, pretty clear. Then unemployment. So these three are the main variables typically used by macroeconomists. But then, because it's money and macro, also some attention for financial markets, which are, let's just spoil it, also terrible this year. And then finally, I thought, here's some time for a Q&A at the end. And yes, that's it. And between all of these steps, I thought, let's do this together. So let's review it together. So I want to give it a score, at least for the economic indicator. So this is a review, right? So I want to give it a score. And then I'm going to ask all of you, and if I forget, let me know in the chat, to say if that's roughly a good score, higher or lower. And also I'm going to be looking at what you are all saying to get sort of a feel for the room. So we're going to do the review together. So it won't just be me, though I will try to sway your opinion heavily in my favor. So let's do that. How does it sound? So let me just see what people are saying. Thank you for this, and nice sweater by Louis. Thank you. I figured this is a sort of a end of year Christmas type of thing, so you need to wear a Christmas sweater. Housing is nuts in Canada. Is it still nuts in Canada? Because all over the world it seems to be slowing down. But I mean, Canada, I know I have some Canadians in my Patreon server to whom I talk regularly, and they also keep going on and on about it. And also I've read this IMF report that sort of, with the slowing housing market, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, these countries that never had housing bust properly are really, really at risk. So we'll definitely talk about that, I think. All right. Current situation in China. We're definitely going to talk about China as well. Yes, well, let's talk about it there. It didn't collapse. Let's put it like that. Anyhow. Okay, let's get started. So, top stories of 2022. So I went looking back to what was I working on start of the year 2022. And actually there was this huge video on inflation, in which I backed a very controversial team. That is, at the time there was this debate: is inflation going to be transitory? So is it going to be like a little bump, and has it already peaked, kind of thing, or is it going to be permanent? Now, I made this massive video. I released it in around the start of January, discussing all the arguments that I could find from the biggest proponents of both teams. Team Permanent saying, represented by people like Peter Schiff, who said, money printing did all of this. We're going to see huge inflation, and gold is going to skyrocket instead. Then there was Jens Weidmann from the Deutsche Central Bank, German Central Bank, saying, actually, the green revolution, energy prices are going to put pressure on inflation from here on out. Then we had Mr. What was his name again? The American Treasury Secretary, ex-Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, who said, labor markets are way too hot. We're going to see way more inflation for longer. And then on the other side, there were more central bankers, Joseph Stiglitz, saying, we can see some more inflation, but it's going to come down. Some of it came from fiscal stimulus. Christine Lagarde, head of the ECB, saying, no, it's really going to be transitory. And I made this massive 1-hour video, and I made it actually already at the end of November. So it was already outdated when I released it, with Unlearning Economics. And we said, okay, Team Transitory has the best arguments, in our opinion. And with a condition that the pandemic is actually over. So this was end of November 2021, and that is right before Delta became prominent in our minds, that is. So that condition was obviously broken. But that being said, I got a lot of flack for this. Justifiably. I was one of the economists that thought inflation around this time last year had already peaked. It clearly hadn't. What happened? Well, the next subject, I would say, because some of the other teams, if you notice, team members, were also quite wrong, right? Like Peter Schiff said, "Oh, it's money printing," but then two things happened that really undermined that hypothesis, or at least made it weaker. One being that the country that printed the most money, the United States, ended up having the strongest currency, the dollar, and also less inflation than Europe, where they did far less of that. And then second, of course, you had the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And as it turned out, Putin had already turned off the gas supply to a certain extent to Europe, and that reverberated already to many markets. And this is one of our primary inputs. Our house here also runs on gas. And nobody saw that coming. At least not that I reviewed, but let me know in the chat if you know anyone who said, there must have been someone, but I think this is just a great lesson in the sense that as a macroeconomist, you can make these predictions, but you're dependent on so many factors, including the whims of individual people. So apparently Putin, I'm not sure how many people he consulted for this decision, but yeah, if you want to be the best macroeconomic forecaster, you should also be able to forecast what individuals that are super influential, like the chairman of the Fed, maybe somewhat easier to do because they say what they're going to do, but also these world leaders, like if she is going to stimulate the economy like crazy, China's economy is not going to collapse. If Russia invades Ukraine, there's going to be a huge extra bout of energy inflation. Which happened. So that's my excuse. Judge me, if you please, in the chat, if you find that a fair or not excuse for being wrong, for backing Team Transitory there. What do you think it will do now? Yeah, let's hope that it has actually peaked now. But again, now I'm much more careful because it again depends on what happens with the energy situation, which is super difficult to oversee. So that leads us to the next big story, I think, the economic war. But wait, let's first see what people thought about inflation. If I'm getting roasted or what you think. Brad says, Putin is the only economist who saw it coming. Exactly, yeah. Jeff, Eurodollars seem to be the closest analysis, Nady is saying, which is a reference to this interview I did with Jeff Snyder. Go check it out under the live tab on this channel if you haven't watched it, very in-depth. Although I don't know if he sort of predicted this kind of inflation 1 year ago, but that's a good to check. The money supply expands when loans are created. Yeah, exactly. So the money supply is what Julia's saying. So it's not directly under control of the central bank, something that's often forgotten and that I try to feature in many of my videos. David says, here in Sweden, house prices are pretty insane, even after prices gone down about 7 or 8%. They're still super high, is what you're saying, I guess. And I totally agree. I moved from the Netherlands to Belgium at the start of last year. And in the Netherlands, house prices were also extremely crazy. In Belgium, luckily for me, a bit less so. Mehdi says, great year for the Moroccan economy. All right, that is interesting as well. I should take a look at that. Joseph says, transfer was the correct choice in January. Yeah, that was my opinion. Always happy to hear that, of course, but of course also feel free to criticize me. So that was the inflation story, and it kept going throughout the year. It got way crazier, right? So I look back at the numbers. It started with something like 5% in the USA, 4% Europe, and now it's 10% Europe, 8% USA, and in some countries way crazier. But we're going to talk about this when we're reviewing the whole global inflation situation. Economic war. So there also, looking back, I made a video that was very controversial about Putin's war chest. So there I made the case. I said at the time it wasn't clear that they were actually going to invade, but they were threatening to invade. And I said, Putin has has learned from the war in 2014 and the invasion in 2014 of the Crimean Peninsula when they got sanctioned, and they have amassed this huge war chest of foreign reserves. So that's foreign money. And I said, you can sanction them, but this is gonna make them immune to sanctions, which was a bit hyperbolic, I have to admit. So I later changed it to shielded against sanctions because of this huge reserve war chest. And this video was very interesting because it aged at first really badly and then really well, in the sense that the title, they're immune to sanctions. Well, first, the ruble absolutely collapsed. Why? Because, I think European and US policymakers had also read the same sort of economic sources that I do and saw, hey, Putin has this huge war chest of foreign reserves. If we're going to sanction the financial sector, then he can use this to save the banks, and its currency is not going to collapse because it could just sell these reserves into the market. So that's selling foreign currency to buy your own, meaning that it won't collapse, right? You're buying your own currency back. So they froze the reserves, which was absolutely unheard of, absolutely crazy move. I'm not no legal scholar, but it set a huge, huge precedent, in my opinion. But then Putin sort of countered somewhat in the sense that he introduced capital control. So then the government was saying, okay, we're going to keep foreign currency in the country. We're going to really restrict how much money can get out. And that had a huge effect then, stabilizing the ruble at first. And then it went back again because they have had this huge current account surplus, meaning trade surplus, meaning selling lots of oil and gas for which the price was now higher. And so they made more money than ever, which was also one of my videos. And that's only referring to foreign currency, foreign money. And so then I made this video like who's actually winning. And at the time there was huge inflation in Russia. So I gave it to the West. But after that, massive energy inflation, especially in Europe, but also in many more countries, contributing to sky-high inflation. Russian inflation went down quite a bit more, but still really high. And then the Russian economy also stabilized, but still, and we're going to look at this a little bit later as well, when we're looking at GDP, their economy shrank real GDP by 4%, whereas Western economies, or allied economies, I should say, because Japan and South Korea, Singapore also sanctioned, grew quite a bit more, even sort of accounting for inflation. So I think that analysis still stands, but this was super painful for all sides. Huge economic development right after a huge pandemic. So I can understand why these videos were so popular, and also why people are voting that this was actually a really bad economic year. Final lesson, I would say, from the sanctions is that the export-import sanctions of real goods seem to be hurting way more than the financial sanctions. So remember, back in March, all the Russian banks are going to be cut off SWIFT. That was all over the news. Seemingly didn't do so much, right? But you saw all of these tanks and airplanes, or airplanes flying with cheap consumer-grade GPSs, and inside of that was all sort of Western equipment. I've also read quite a few reports that industry in Russia is struggling. They've really scaled back to much more inferior technology. So the export sanctions seem to be the ones doing the damage, whereas the financial sanctions seem not to be so impactful against a current account surplus country, which is Russia, which gets its foreign currency, which gets so much foreign currency that it can save its own financial sector, I would say. That would be a lesson for me. But I'm wondering what what you think about this. And I want to do an update on all of this early next year. Maybe I figured maybe it could be nice or good idea to do this 1 year after or so. Let me see what people are saying. Just economy going is not enough. What do you think about the economy that tariffs on goods from China are contributing to inflation? Probably they are. But I'm not entirely sure if this is a super big factor at the moment, because energy is just such a big factor at the moment. All right, then let's move on. So that was, in my opinion, second biggest story. But also let me know if you think there are big stories that I'm forgetting. China slowdown. This was already at the end of 2021 a story. Evergrande. Is it going out of business? Yes or no? Property sector slowing down. You have this huge ghost cities that have been built and nobody's living in them. At some point there were reports, but they're gonna move in there, and seemingly to some cities, this actually happened, but then others not. It's quite difficult to get information, accurate information from inside China about this, I would say. But I think most economists agreed that the property bubble was so insane in China, given that they had property prices on Western levels, whereas incomes are not on those levels, right? So that's hugely expensive relative to income property. I know some of you have been talking about the property bubble in Canada, but the Chinese property bubble is or was super big. But then the government itself tried to deflate it. So they tried to tighten the screws, make the rules tougher for credit flowing to these developers that were making so many properties that nobody was seemingly living in. So I think economists have been saying for a super long time now, or many investors as well, that China's economy is due for a reckoning. Their debt to GDP is rising because they're spending or creating all of this credit to do something that's not really contributing to GDP as much. It is, of course, contributing to GDP. The property sector has been estimated to be 27% of the economy in China, because, of course, construction workers are still working. They're still buying food. They're still buying materials. That does contribute to GDP, and that is roughly hasn't been seen that often before. Only in Spain, right before 2008, and Spain had this huge property bubble. So this is why I think the most reputable economists on China that I follow have been comparing it to Japan, which also had this huge property bubble right before its economy completely stagnated. And therefore I made the call, this is probably going to stagnate. Then, of course, back in 2021 at the start, they were the big COVID winners. They did this zero COVID policy, was seemingly very successful, not that many cases. But now, or during 2022, that completely changed. And their economy really started to hurt because they had to lock down so many times with Omicron variant, which is much more transmissible. And so this, I think, is when many people became super, in investment terms, I would say, bearish, negative about China. And for me, this really all culminated in YouTube videos proclaiming the collapse of China in 30 days. And this was when was it? September. So that didn't happen. And these videos got millions of views, super popular, and they just annoyed me because, come on. So I made a response video. Anyway, that's the thumbnail that you see there. And I think there I argued, no, yes, it's a big problem, but they have their own currency. They're like Russia, current account surplus country, so they have some wiggle room. It's not always good to have a current account surplus, but it gives you in these situations some wiggle room because you're not at risk of running out of foreign currency. Your own currency you can always create, but you're not running at a risk. It's really risky, like Sri Lanka had to run out of foreign currency, and then your own currency collapses, and then you get massive inflation. So that was my argument, and I think that actually held up fairly well. And I also said, they're going to slow down a lot, and seemingly that's now also the case. But they've now abandoned their COVID-19 zero lockdown strategy. And so we might see somewhat of a resurgence, although the property sector bubble could definitely be a huge downward force that may be much bigger. But it's very difficult to actually say. But that being said, this story definitely dominated 2021, I would say. Also because it meant for all sorts of other countries to whom China was lending a lot, especially in the Belt and Road Initiative in the Asian countries around China, that this money was now not flowing anymore so quickly. And this contributed arguably to some other crises like we saw in Pakistan and Sri Lanka. On top of course, the economic war. So on top of that, all of these countries had to deal with sky-high energy prices, sky-high food prices, and now also with less investment from China, less demand from China for raw materials, which plummeted in price. So huge story, I would say. Wonder what you all think about this. The China story, I don't think we've seen the last of it. What do you think? Mr. Wolf has an opinion about Norway. We'll get to that. I don't say too much on China yet. Let's see. All right, let's move on then to what, in my opinion, is Sri Lanka. They owe, okay, this is good. CC says Sri Lanka, they owe the most debt to the West, and that's true, right? Even though a lot of the debts from China were hidden, they still owe most debt to the West, right? And this is why in my Sri Lanka video I said, okay, there's multiple factors. I made sort of a game out of it, like who's the worst, but that's YouTube. Has to be a bit entertaining. But even though it's a very serious situation, but of course, yes, you can borrow most from someone, but if one source of borrowing dries up, you're still going to be in a lot of trouble, right? So it doesn't matter too much that, and I'm not blaming China for this, right? It's like China's economy is slowing down. They don't want to do that. And so this is why a lot of their loans are now also drying up. And this hurts a lot of economies. But I don't think you can blame that on China. You could blame on them that they have been lending to the wrong projects, that they have been lending to corrupt projects, and therefore it doesn't contribute to an economy building up, therefore they cannot repay it. But you cannot really blame them for having a slowing economy and then not being able to lend so much, right? All right. China's too complicated for my brain. Yes, Kaku. That's that's true. Yeah, I'm gonna dive into it a little bit more in 2023. How many more defaults do you see in the third world? Many more. In fact, Ghana just defaulted, and they apparently did it prematurely, so they didn't have to. Is the last thing that I read about it. But this storm that Sri Lanka was in, which was the next great story on my slides, is the same for everyone, and especially. So this is, I think, the next story. So let's go to the currency crisis. And what I found particularly noteworthy is that there is this pattern of current account deficit countries, so trade deficit countries, getting into trouble, notably Sri Lanka. But then there's also Tunisia, who hasn't defaulted yet, but was getting in trouble. Haiti is terrible at the moment, has huge crisis. It's not being covered so much at the moment, but it's on my radar. And many countries in Africa. Ghana is now the one most in the news. But I think there are many countries that are really in a tricky situation. Pakistan is another big one that I didn't get to cover, and then they also had huge floods. But all of these countries, you see, all major emerging markets are, or maybe most economies have a lot of problems at the moment. But the ones with the biggest current account deficits seem to get into the most trouble, simply because their currencies then started collapsing. because there's not enough demand for them because they're importing way more, needing to pay their own currency. And then you get way more inflation, right? And so you're basically running out of foreign money, and you cannot import the stuff that you really need, like fuel, what you saw in Sri Lanka as well, these huge queues for gas. And these are the countries that have had a really tough time, and economists call this phenomena that you have this huge difference between current account surplus and current account deficit countries. Global imbalances is what they call this. And this was a really hot topic right before the global financial crisis, where the oil exporters were having these huge current account surpluses, and China. But this lessened a little bit, and now it's totally back. And you're going to see this as well when we're going to talk about inflation, growth. Oil exporters, are on top of the world. And the ones who had this current account deficit are really struggling. And one of them notably has been the UK. The UK is one of the... I didn't go... From the currency crisis, this is the one I covered. I didn't cover. I was just working on other videos. But they were... This is not a coincidence. They had a 9 or 8% current account deficit, and the pound crashed when the government announced, look, we're going to do these tax cuts for wealthy people that import a lot of stuff. So, yeah. All right, currency crisis. We haven't seen the last of it. I'm definitely going to cover that more next year as well, sadly, because this is not a happy thing. Let's see some of the comments. The Bank of Japan, new curve control. I still have to read up on it a bit more carefully before commenting on that. Could Saudi Arabia abandon the US dollar system? This is what Summer Militia, what a name, says. Yes, it's tricky because the dollar is just so dominant that it's also really useful for Saudi Arabia, because I think they buy also their stuff typically mostly with the US dollar. But they have been talking to China to start trading in yuan as well. And one thing that we have been seeing perhaps is at least a strong will of countries like China, Russia, and their allies to move away from the dollar system. But it's really difficult. But if, let's put it like this. If you want to do that, if you want to move away from the dollar system, which does allow the United States to run a super high current account deficit, then Saudi Arabia is a good country to get on your side, especially now with these high oil prices. So that's what I would say to that. Am I parsing the chapters too fast, Cuckoo? I'm sorry, I will try to slow down a little bit. But there's so much more. Yeah. All right. Let's continue. Currency crisis. Because all of this, so I just wanted to give you an overview of the biggest stories, in my opinion, for 2021 for the global economy. All of this is going to come back when we talk about GDP, inflation, and unemployment again. And then there's also a Q&A at the end. So don't worry. I'll stick around. Next biggest story, in my opinion, cost of living crisis. So this is also, I would say, why you have this difference between pretty high GDP growth numbers, and yet and low unemployment, which we're also going to come to, and yet the people feel as if we're already in a recession, as if the times are already really bad. Why? Because for most working people, I would say, who have a steady job, their cost of living has really gone up. So their salary is not keeping up with their main costs, which are energy. And I can confirm that our energy bill has absolutely gone through the roof. We had to be much more careful with our energy usage, which is maybe the bright side, but also food prices, and that's even more terrible for the people who can afford it least, because you need some element of energy. You need at least food, and food is a bigger part of your expenses. If you're, for most poor people, typically, like the rich you are, typically, the more relatively you spend on other stuff. So if food prices go through the roof, it really hurts you the less you have, and thus it hurts most people. And that's, I think, is why so many of you voted 2022 was a good year for the macroeconomy? No, it was not. 82% says it was not a good year. So, yeah. That is the cost of living crisis, very acute in Europe. And this video I did saying, hey, how much worse is going to get? So far, so good, in Europe at least, is because we had this very mild weather. So I talked about these different scenarios, saying, you know, you have the mild recession scenario, a bad recession, and an apocalyptic recession, depending on the weather, what Putin will do next, how fast we can move to alternative energy sources. And so far in Europe, even though energy prices are still way too high, the weather was amazing, except for last week when it was super cold. And that has a huge impact on demand. But then even taking that into account, demand was reduced in countries like here in Belgium by 20%, purely because people were saving energy usage, or maybe buying solar panels, but also just turning the heat down. I turned it down here from normally 20% to 18% degrees Celsius, that is. And actually, you know, if you wear a Christmas sweater, to me, that's not a big problem, I would say, and it saves a ton of energy. And I was also talking to my research intern here, Oskar, who is German and had these contacts in German industry, who would say, you know, German industry cut back a lot, and then some economists would say, yeah, that's super negative because that means they're not producing so much anymore. And then he said, well, anecdotally, some of these factories were just going, you know, have a careful look at their production process, and they saw all of these big inefficiencies, you know, burning the furnace way too high. It's not necessary. And I think for many households it was similar. You can buy this little pillow, put it under the door so that it doesn't come so much wind through it, right? And I think a lot of that also happened. Cold showers, way, you know, shorter showers, 20% demand reduction. So these two elements that I talked about in that video, Europe's upcoming recession, so far seem to have really helped, at least. So, okay, Canis Lupus, thank you so much for supporting the channel, first of all. And you're saying, but what about Germany? Cost of living here is rocketing. This is still true, right? It here in Belgium as well. The cost of living is still sky high, going up, depending a little bit on if you have to renew your energy contract. This is inflation, right? This is still. I'm not saying this is not a big problem. It's still the case. It was just that we expected 3 months ago for it to be so much worse, even still, because of energy. But it's still a problem. Okay, this is interesting. Okay, this is a difficult name to pronounce, but YPEY1 says, if the Germans are inefficient, I'm starting to worry. Look, let me tell you something controversial. Being a Dutchman, this can land me in hot waters. Germany is not so efficient. They have the reputation for being super efficient, but it could be a lot more efficient, in my humble opinion. Controversial opinion of the day. I'm not going to explain it too much more. People, please defend Germany in the chat against such an outrageous claim. But coming from the Netherlands, I would say not as efficient as I had expected. Room for improvement, and they're improving, right? So that's good. Okay, so these are, in my opinion, the biggest stories of the global economy in 2022. Inflation, the economic war, China's slowdown, currency crises in many countries, including the United Kingdom, and a huge cost of living crisis in many, many countries, prominently also in Europe. Yes. Germans. Raul agrees with me. Some people are saying that this is exactly what a German would say, and it could be true. All right, let's see. So I'm also going to talk about how much these themes will likely work into next year, but we're going to get to that. Let's first now start with I just wanted to mention, and this is a shout out to the Plain Bagel, great channel if you're into finance. He also talks about the economy sometimes. The biggest story I missed, I'm really sad about it. I prepared a whole video, or I prepared a lot of research for it. The crash of the pound. They managed to stabilize it so far, but I was just working on too many videos at the time to cover it. I think what had been said about it is that they had this current account deficit. It was a very stupid move to then do tax cuts for the rich, and they also, I think, spent a lot of money on making the energy prices lower. And that the controversial thing about that is, that does help people, but then they also don't reduce their demand so much. And your problem that energy prices are still sky high is still there, and it's just more difficult if you have a current account deficit. I would like to add to that the UK has had this business model for a long time, or economic model, where they wanted to be the banker of the world. London is still as big of a financial center as New York, whereas the UK is no longer the global superpower that it was back, in the 30s, right? Strange. So what they did is they courted Europeans. London is Europe's banking center, and they courted a lot of, let's say, less democratic rulers and elites from less wealthy countries. Put it like this. That's why they say London is London grad, and you have all of this Russian money there. Now, what's happening? First, with Brexit, they make their banking center and therefore their currency much less attractive to the Europeans. Okay, which is, they had their reasons, but that doesn't help the pound as a major investment destination. Then they have these sanctions, which is makes a lot of sense politically speaking. But it makes sense then that the consequence is that a lot of Russian money is being pulled out of London because it's no longer the safe haven. Then maybe a lot of other similar type of money is also going to think twice about putting all of that in the UK, and that might be a good thing. But it also just makes the pound less attractive, decreases the demand for the pound, and so I think it makes sense that if you look at the exchange rate of the pound, it has been falling for years now, for 10 years. Like if you zoom out, if you cut through the noise a little bit, you'll see that this latest collapse is just that. It's this latest collapse. It's not, Liz Truss collapsed the pound and that's the whole story. No, I think there's more to it. I think their economic model, the source of demand for pounds, is under pressure. And that's why I wanted to make a video about. It's still in my archive. Maybe it will come out next year, depending on what happens with the pound. So that's a little preview, and that's the biggest story I missed. And if you want to get the details more on the financial side, shout out to the Plain Bagel and also Patrick Boyle, who covered this story from the financial perspective really well, I would say. All right, some chats about this. Okay, lots of chatter. Harry says UK is a bigger, better developed version of Lebanon. There is actually a little bit of truth to this, right? In the sense that Lebanon was the preeminent financial center of the Middle East. It was this stable, safe haven, which now has shifted to Dubai. And Lebanon, has a terrible economy at the moment. I wouldn't say it's like that bad. I know there's still a lot of amazing research. There's a lot of still amazing fundamentals also in the UK, but I get where you're coming from with that when you say that. Okay, so this is Kabil. Joeri, maybe you should do Pakistan before next year to give the rest of the world hope. It can't get worse than here. And that's sadly, I know this is the case in the sense that there has been these huge floods in Pakistan as well. Their economy is terrible at the moment. I would like to cover it. Although, let's put it like this: I hope it will not get worse, and then I don't have to cover it. So best of luck there. All right, shall we get to the reviewing part of the of the session. Let's review the global economy. So this is not your own economy. This is the global economy, because I cannot review all economies in the world. 2021, real GDP. So this chart from the World Bank, the global economy is in steep slowdown. The blue line was sort of the projected line, before COVID. Red line up to where you see these diverging lines is where we are now. So we have seen real economic growth, even though there's been sky-high inflation. And that makes sense, right? In the sense that the economy took such a beating in 2020, and partially in 2021 still. All of these lockdowns, come on, that had to have had a serious effect. This was absolutely massive. I think economists, at least, or people talking about the economy, should appreciate more how big this shock is, how you would say it in economics was. It was so big. And we have recovered from it, but we're below our path that we were on. So this is how you should read this graph. And then the World Bank makes this sort of scenario analysis saying, baseline, we keep growing like this, but we're never returning, according to them, to that previous path. So this lasting damage from the pandemic makes sense. But it could even be a bit worse. So real GDP has grown. So we're going to review it, right? So please get ready to give this some marks, some scale of, let's use a scale of 1 to 10. Shall we do that? Scale of 1 to 10. 10 being good, perfect. 1 being the worst ever. Maybe something, I think the worst economic collapse has been in countries like Ukraine, Libya, Pakistan, Haiti, Sri Lanka. That would be maybe like a 3, just to give some perspective on how to grade this. Anyway, yes, it's not. It's been stellar. Growth has been fairly high, but nothing spectacular. Also, if you look at the trend that it was on previously, fairly similar, and it doesn't seem to be that we're catching up. So, also makes sense that people are pessimistic about this, right? Then winners and losers. So I had a look at some countries that did extremely well or not so well. Saudi Arabia, big winner of 2022 when we look at real GDP. Plus real GDP, so correct for inflation, plus 9.8% is from one of my sources. If you're going to Google, you might find slightly different numbers depending on the source. Here I used the OECD, for this one. India 6.6%, also surprisingly high in the list. India did actually really well this year. Could also be that they had a bad year last year, which you always should keep into account. But Saudi Arabia, for obvious reasons, right? Oil prices through the roof. What were the winners? Qatar, Norway, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, including Dubai. But losers, Ukraine, makes sense, I would say. But still, let's just look in horror at this number. Minus 35% GDP, real GDP growth for Ukraine. Makes sense. But then, surprising to me, Libya, minus 18.5%. And that's strange because Libya's main export is oil. So you could have expected things to improve there. I looked into it. It was a bit difficult to find. What the most convincing reason I could find is that the security situation there is really bad again. So maybe not. I'm not sure if anyone in the chat is there or has much geopolitical knowledge there, but maybe not full official civil war, but still high sort of disorder, chaos. Some other countries did super poorly. I couldn't find their numbers here in the OECD database, but Sri Lanka, Haiti, Afghanistan as well. Covered it in the video. Pakistan, terrible. Some of these were highly inflationary. Afghanistan, not so inflationary, but because, strange story, they outsourced their money printer. And then that was sanctioned. And so they actually couldn't make any more money there. And the banking system, the private banking system, was also at odds with Sharia law. So not functioning properly after the Taliban took over. So that there, you might see money printing can be a factor for sure. So they had deflationary or still inflationary, if I remember correctly, but not as high as Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Haiti. Russia still minus 3.9%. So yes, they did much better than expected after the first sanctions hit. But come on, that's still really bad. Like if that was real GDP growth in the United States, I think you had way more doom videos on YouTube than you had now. So yeah, though I'm just going to give an overview. That's the idea here. So what would you say, sort of given this, like, okay, we had fair GDP growth, like overall, right? But we didn't catch up, and that's a real shame. Ideally, after lockdowns all over the world, the economy should bounce back to where it was, right? That's what you would hope. That didn't happen. Lasting impact. What would you score it? Scale of 1 to 10. 1 being worst, 10 being perfect, 3 being countries that like Libya, Ukraine. Okay, so just let me know in the chat. I am leaning towards, because we're not talking about inflation yet, I'm leaning towards a 6 out of 10. That's my opinion. So let me know what you think, and then I can adjust it still a little bit. April says 4 out of 10. I do like 6. The name is I do like, and he says 6. I do like 6. Okay. Let me see if I can actually. Well. We can end the poll. 6, 6, 5, 5, 7. All right, 7. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 7 is too high. There's a poll going to be. Because I see some. Let me know. Please vote. Do vote quickly. Because I see most answers around 7, and then 6s, 5s. Haven't seen so many. Nobody's going above me. Yes, it's too high. 70% says it's too high. 5.5 out of 10 by Juan. Adjusting from a 6, but maybe that's a rounding error. So, yeah, okay. 75% thinking it's too high. Okay, 7 was my base. 6 was my... Oh, wait, I said 6, and now I'm saying 7 is too high as a question. Wow, okay. What is it? Yeah. I see some 7s. Okay. 7 is too high. Then that was my bad for asking the wrong question. But then let's say it's a 6 is what I'm getting from all of you. That was fairly on point. 6. Real GDP review of the global economy. Okay. That's real GDP. But now to the real story. Real GDP to the real story. Inflation. Let's just say it like this. 2022 was the year of inflation, the year that inflation came back. So what you see here is a map of the world by the IMF. Colors indicating sort of orangey is high inflation. The more orange you get, the higher your inflation is. The greener you get, you have low inflation. And green inflation, in their opinion, is roughly around the target of 2%, right? So China, roughly around 2%. Saudi Arabia, there we have them again, roughly around 2%. And then, yeah, I just wanted to show you this chart in the bottom left corner, which is coal and oil prices. And this goes back a long time. And I think you can see here that the shock we've seen here is almost equivalent to what we saw in the 80s great oil crisis. That had a huge and lasting impact on the economics profession. And that was also maybe coincidentally the last time that we saw this massive inflation. So I think that was definitely the biggest factor. Another key point of evidence that I've seen for that is that at the start of the year, it was all about US inflation, and now it's all about European inflation. Who was closest to the Russian gas and had the most energy inflation? Europe. So that I don't think many people will disagree with that anymore. But some positive news. That's the second chart. That is global shipping rates. So at the start of 2022, everybody was like, people are locked down inside. They're ordering all of their stuff from China and not going to a bar anymore. That trend has reversed. And so it seems to be that global supply chains are going back to normal. Freight rates, so that means like how expensive it is to send a package from one part of the world to another via ship, is really now coming down. So there are a lot of goods, services, goods mainly, that contribute to inflation last year that have come down significantly, which is hopeful. But I'm not gonna, might be still overpowered by another energy increase, right? So let's see. Winners and losers. Winners had low inflation in this case. That's why you see them there. So Japan, 1.99% inflation. There I've seen some other sources, 3%, but this is the one I found. China, 2.2, Saudi Arabia, 2.9, and also, interestingly, Switzerland, 3% inflation. Strange, right? Maybe my hypothesis was wrong. Switzerland is also in the middle of Europe. They should also have sky inflation if it was Russian energy, right? Japan also imports a lot of energy, also from Russia. So China doesn't, but for China, their economy seems to be slowing down so much that demand's so low that that this has contributed to them having very low inflation. Saudi Arabia is maybe selling oil cheaper in the country and is using its massive gains from all of that oil to compensate partially the population. So Switzerland and Japan, mysteries. I looked into it a little bit. What I found is that Switzerland there's a couple of factors. The Swiss currency went up like crazy, making all imports cheaper because the central bank raised interest rates, and maybe because it's a safe haven in Europe typically. Maybe especially with what was going on in the UK. Not entirely sure. But their currency went up a lot. So that contributed. If your currency gets worth way more, all imports, including energy, is cheaper, right? Another thing, they're really relying on a lot of renewable energy, apparently, hydropower. On top of that, they had some price controls, more than other European countries in the article that I read, at least. And Japan also apparently has quite a lot of price controls on energy and wheat, especially, meaning that producers cannot hike their prices so much. They have to do it in small steps. So if you have that, then you likely have less inflation, but you might expect that a lot of your producers will get in trouble. But yeah, these are the best explanations that I could find for these strange cases, so to see. I mean, if you look at the world map, everybody had huge inflation. So here I see Into Europe in the chat. Super nice to see you, Hugo from Into Europe, who's also been using the studio here from time to time, and who has made a lot of the animations for me last year. So if people didn't notice, maybe my animations got a bit nicer because Hugo has been helping me out from Into Europe with that. So huge shout out to Into Europe, and thank you for joining the chat, and thank you for contributing and saying, there's not so much natural gas usage in Switzerland. Oliver, thank you so much for contributing to the channel. And he says, Japan is sticking to 0% interest rates, which helps to create deflation. I wonder, but there, arguably, that also led to this collapse in the yen, which should have increased in inflation, right? If their currency is going down. So, yeah. All right. Yeah, Paxton Peace says that the yen has lost a lot, right? So yeah, that's a mystery. Maybe actually I should once again return to Japan next year with a more continued analysis. But let's see. Okay, let's go to losers of this year. Not talked about so much in the news. Still the biggest losers, like absolutely crazy inflation, 200%, and one for Venezuela, I think. Sudan also 180 or something like that. Very high numbers. These are just countries that are in sort of a collapsing state, right? Like they're huge government failure. The currency that a government issues, typically, this is something when I did these inflation videos on hyperinflation, all of that, always most countries that have hyperinflation either have huge current account deficit, so their currency then collapses because they have to import so much, and they bring their own money to the foreign exchange market. Nobody wants it, so the value goes down. Second case is when a government collapses. A currency is a liability, is debt from the government, from the central bank. If a government collapses, it's absolutely worthless. It can no longer enforce you to use that currency. I think this is, and there might also be printing money. That could also definitely be true, but definitely often happens as a reaction to either of these two things, because then either the choices don't pay any wages anymore or print the money, and the print the money is less painful at that moment. But the real problem is this insane current account deficit or a collapsing government. So either you just go down in a huge deflationary spiral or hyperinflation. Sadly, Sudan and Venezuela. Getting close to that, also less talked about this year, Argentina. Number I found 72%. I also found somewhere that they're getting close now to 90%. So maybe I should do a video about that next year. They have a highly dollarized economy, which is the same as Turkey. And Turkey also has a super high inflation. This was covered quite well. I also made a video about it. Most people were saying it's interest rates. I think it contributed, for sure. But hugely dollarized economy. What has the government done? They have now implemented this new policy called liraization instead of dollarization, liraization. And that actually seemed to have worked a little bit, because the lira has now stabilized a little bit after a super long fall. But they also use some other tricks, and that is what my next video will be about, which I think I will likely release on Thursday, so in 2 days. So that will be the final video for this year for Money Macro. Then also a big loser on the inflation front, Eastern Europe, especially the Baltics, that were super reliant. The more you really see this pattern, the more reliant you were on Russian gas, the higher your inflation is now. Have I missed any winners or losers in your opinion? Let me know. And otherwise, I think we're going to go to a vote here. What is the score for the global economy regarding inflation? Again, well, actually, let's say that here Sudan and Venezuela score a 1, just to say like how bad hyperinflation actually really is. So that's the 1. Let's give Japan in this case. Let's give them a 9. 2% inflation in this environment is great, right? Like they wanted a little bit of inflation. They have 2% inflation, their target. So Japan is a 9. Venezuela is a 1. What is the global economy in your opinion? Let me know in the comments so that I can get a bit of an idea. Just gonna close the poll, previous poll. Okay, it's transitory 10. All right. So I would a 5. Okay, from Ashumat. Hope I pronounced it correctly. Harry says 3.5. Friedrich 5. Juan Pedro Mariano, a 4. Okay, Broken 5, Summer Militia 6. Still actually not so bad. Okay, here they're coming 4.5. Japan is a 9. Yeah, that's good. 4, 5, 5. 4, 4, 5. Yeah, this is definitely worse than the GDP score. So I would agree with this. Okay. 5, I think I would also would have been the thing that came to mind for me. So 5 out of 10 is what I would say, because because Venezuela's a 1. You know, globally they're still. I might go even a bit lower otherwise, but okay, I'm gonna say let's start a poll. So so I think 5 is on the high side, but might be correct. So I would say is 5 too high for global inflation score? That's my question to you. Is it too high? So if many people vote yes, it's too high, then we're gonna lower it to 4, I would say. So you should now by now see this poll. Yes. Ooh, and a no vote. So let's see. Global inflation. Terrible year. And then we can move on to happier news after this. Yes. 5. Daniel says 5 feels like a very average year. This year has been really bad year for the economy. 4 is the best case. I would say like the what I typically use on a 1 to 10 score, let's say for when grading students, is a 6 is sufficient. A 7 is like what you average. Vote no, please. Is people are saying this is actually a close call. 54% says. I think no. 55. Okay, I'm gonna end it. And then see what the result was. Okay, no, it's not too high. So we're going to stay with a 5, 54%. So inflation 2022, a 5. Inflation 2022. Final. So now we have a 6 for real GDP. There we go. 5 for inflation. And next up, unemployment. So let's talk about unemployment, because I think with all the doom and gloom, this hasn't been talked about enough. And it's also something that you might not talk about enough, because most people in most countries are employed, right? So for most people, even though they read about this in the paper, this is not such a big issue, even if there's high unemployment. Although I've lived in South Africa for a while, you do notice, I would say that you would notice it on the street. You feel inequality. It's not a nice feeling, I would say. But for most people who are employed, this is perhaps less top of mind. But I would argue it's very important, and especially youth unemployment. Because if you have youth unemployment for a long time, you get these really disillusioned young people, especially men, higher crime, and also they don't get a chance to develop, right? It takes time. You need a job. Like anyone of you who've had a job in 10 years, or maybe you've had a job for 10 years, you get better at it, right? If you don't have a job ever, you never get better at it. So for an economy, it's super important. I think a bit underrated, unemployment. So let's look at these graphs. So I tried to highlight some countries. It has been trending down for most countries. Unemployment is fairly low. And this might have contributed to inflation. But let's celebrate this, and also let's have a look at countries like Spain and Greece. These are the top 2 lines in the chart, who've seen their unemployment rates go from in the 20s to in the high teens. So 12%, 13%, which is still absolutely way too high. Okay, let's just be clear about that. But still, there's finally something positive to say here, positive trend. However, then 2 points I want to make about this. Uh, One is youth unemployment. So China was in the news now that youth unemployment was actually going up quite a bit, up to 20%, which is precisely what I was talking about. Is so bad. It's one of the worst forms of unemployment. And okay, this is a headline from The Economist. In developing countries, many people cannot afford not to work. Meaning that because I looked at statistics, and Southern Europe is always super bad, South Africa as well, and then Southeast Asia, for example, some very poor countries, very low unemployment numbers. So I found that quite strange. But apparently what happens there is that people often don't register for unemployment benefits because this is so poorly organized that it's more of a hassle, or it costs money or effort or money, right? Instead of hustling on the street to register. So, okay, the statistics are not as accurate for the whole world for this, but still, a downward trend, at least in advanced economies. Let's have some positive news as well. Winners, so advanced economies, on average, down to 4.5% from 6 or something last year, which is great. Spain and Greece, like I mentioned, and the rest of Southern Europe, winners, notably in this category, even though it's still really bad unemployment. So nothing to celebrate 13% unemployment, but if you're used to 20%, that's much better. And I also read some economic commentators talking about how great it is that now the economies are open again, the tourists are going back to Southern Europe, which is great for these economies. Some losers. South Africa, I had a look at their unemployment rate. The trend is absolutely very worrying. 34% unemployment, and it's like this line that's only going up. It's not going up straight up, but it's a trend rather than what you see here. The world trend is downwards. South Africa trend is upwards, and 34% unemployment. I mean that's crazy. I lived in South Africa. You can see this in the street. You can definitely see it. It's really terrible. So the losers in this regard, given that the data for many countries, because maybe there are many African countries that have this problem, but it doesn't show up in the data. Youth unemployment, also important to talk about. China is a loser in that regard this year, I would say. You also have there, this has been in the news quite a bit, this trend that... lying flat is what they call it, that young people are getting so desperate to get a job. That situation here has really, in Europe, has really disappeared a little bit. 10 years ago, and that's quite remarkable, because 10 years ago or something, it was much more difficult for people like my students, I was then a student, to find a job, and now my students are having no trouble finding a job. So, still, sky high inflation is eating away at their wage, but at least they have a job. Okay, maybe nice to have some good news as well, but maybe I'm being too optimistic. Let me know if that's true. Tom says EU is a loser in general, or unemployment on this. The trend is good, right? But unemployment in the EU is much too high. That's true. I agree. So, what would you say? Unemployment, development in 2022, global economy. Great. High, low. Let me know. South Africa, I would say, is a 3. And which country has super low unemployment? Germany still have super low unemployment. I think so. Netherlands still, really low unemployment in the Netherlands at the moment, I think. Singapore, Let's say these kind of countries get a 9. So what is Switzerland is normally not considered Anschumant part of Southern Europe. No. Okay. I do like, says 7.5. Del says an 8. Alexander says a 7. I would say, I'm going to say a little bit high, an 8. So here, Zerumo says, yeah, it's weird for me, someone who graduated out of the '08 crisis, which was me as well, where there were no jobs and a bunch of us had to do schooling or sit bored. Yeah, exactly. So that's not talked about enough, right? That this situation has actually changed, I would say. 889 from Lee. Someone says Europe is screwed, but still gives it a 10. So okay, 7. So I'm gravitating towards an 8 for unemployment. Let's see. I don't see too many people going above that. So let's see if you think that is too high. Is an 8 too high for unemployment globally 2022? Let's do a poll. So see a 7, 8. So here's Zerumo says, what's worse, erosion of their wage and inflation plus housing bubbles, or now what we're having, jobs? No clue if it's better or worse for Zoomers versus millennials with a 10-year difference. Yeah, so this is something I talked about with some other economists during the year, that what you see is that in voters, when you look at voters, inflation seems to be much more hated than a recession, maybe even. Like people get really, well, yeah, depending on how heavy the recession is. But anyway, that was the hypothesis was that inflation hits all of us, whereas unemployment only hits a few of us. And when you look at, you live in a democracy, then that, you know, there's likely to be a bias towards a hate for inflation. That was a hypothesis. Maybe it's not true, but I thought it was still an interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that beforehand. What does too high mean? Big boss. It means like, oh, an 8 is too high of a number. So, you know, rather unemployment 2022 should get a 7 or a 6 or a 5 or something like that. Okay, let's see. Well, let's end the poll and say, what do we have? Is it too high? No, say most people. So it's not too high. So okay, again, let's just gonna stick with an 8. So unemployment gets an 8. Inflation a 5, and oops, GDP is 6. So was it a bad year for the economy? Most people say yes, but the grades are not so insanely bad. X-Man says he cannot see the poll. Sorry. I do not know how to fix this at the moment. Final point, global economy 2022. We've done the grading so far is financial markets. This is not macro, but this is money and macro channel, right? So money and macro, we talk about not just financial markets, but money, monetary policy, inflation, that kind of stuff, and also sometimes financial markets. So, but we do, when we talk about money, we do often talk about gold, Bitcoin. You know, are they actually the inflation hedge? Are they the real types of money? Some people like to argue. Well, top chart here, also possibly because why many people think it was a terrible year. Financial markets had a terrible year. The above two indexes are the global MCSI, if I pronounce it correctly, indexes. This is a long chart, so this is over a long period of time, but the little sort of, downward correction, you could say, is 2022. Of course, we had this huge bull market, they would say, so positive for almost all financial markets going up, people feeling richer. Also some things like houses becoming that are actually used as consumable goods as well. Things we actually use getting too expensive for many people, but the homeowners being really happy, right? Their values going up, or most of them. But this year, no, everything went in reverse, except for energy. So energy stocks makes sense given everything we've talked about so far with the economic war, energy war. Went up. Gold, roughly flat. So going back to inflation discussion at the start of the year, someone like Peter Schiff says, we printed too much money, everything's going to go into gold. He was right on inflation, that is. Inflation went up quite a bit higher, but gold stayed flat, even in such a high inflationary environment. So that's interesting. The graph's still going a little bit down, but gold has recently gone up back a little bit. So that prediction didn't seem to come true. But he did better than the Bitcoin bros, which had a terrible year. This is the Bitcoin price. Bitcoin bros being a mean term to describe people who really, really into Bitcoin religiously. So sorry about that. But Bitcoin had a terrible year. I coined it the crypto's great financial crisis because so many crypto financial institutions went out of business. They all went into debt with the assumption of higher asset prices in 2021. They were right. They got super rich. And now things have gone into reverse. So for financial markets, for most people, terrible year, I would say. Winners and losers. Winners, energy stocks. If you had bought energy stocks, you actually would have made money. I also asked some other finance channels, Ben Felix, Plain Bagel, and Patrick Boyle, what they thought about this, and they basically told me, because I don't invest too much myself, I'm more of an economist, energy stocks are the winners of this year. For the rest, basically everyone's losers, even though some lost less, and so they were considered winners by them, but that doesn't fly with me. So everything is a loser, but especially tech. Tech had a terrible year. Amazon down by a lot. Google, that is Alphabet, Meta from Facebook, down by a lot. Likely because of much lower advertising prices. I read that mobile games had a huge impact on this because everybody was staying home for the pandemic, buying mobile games, doing lots of advertisements on Instagram and all that kind of stuff. YouTube, perhaps. Now less so driving prices down. Hitting also YouTube channels, advertising revenue. You can definitely notice. Crypto, huge loser of 2022. Sorry for all of you invested in crypto. Tech as well, yeah. High interest rates, of course, also have in economic theory, have a big role to play here, right? So interest rates going up, that kind of debt or a bank account becoming more attractive compared to these risky stocks. That was also a big factor here, probably. Yes. What do you think? Financial markets. What grade shall we give this? Maybe we should say for the baseline score 1 to 10. 1 is if you had money in FTX, that's a 1 for you, probably, right? 10 if you owned energy. No, not a 10. That's not 9 if you owned energy stocks, I would say. So what would you say is financial markets? What is the score for financial markets this year? 7. 7. Okay, that's pretty good. 3.5 from Igor. 4, 7, 3. Automotive sector was positive? Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, makes sense given that we had this huge car shortages still. But yeah, was it still positive? Tesla is definitely not, but maybe that's more of a tech stock. 4, 4, 3, 5, 3, 3, 6, 4, 5, 2. Oh man, okay, so this is not a good year, huh? 4, 4, 5, 1. 1 from Mark. So the global stock market, all asset markets were as bad as FTX. Now that's bearish, as they would say. Okay, I'm gonna say. Actually, you know what? I was talking to Patrick Boyle about this, and he said, if we look at most financial markets, this is more of a correction still at the moment if they don't collapse so much further because it had this huge increase and now a correction is what he said. So I'm gonna anchor this discussion at 5. I would say 5 because Crypto had a great financial crisis. Globally, asset prices had a terrible year, lost money, but not a great financial crisis. X-Men doesn't play casino with his money, so did not invest in FTX. So I would say 5. So then we're going to say, should I say, is it too high then? Yeah, most people were start a poll. Most people were saying it should be lower. 4 or 5 threes is like, is the grade 5 too high for asset markets this year? That is the question. Is it too high? Yeah. So should it be lower? That's my question to you. Let me know what you think is too high. Yes, some contestants. It's always a correction. Says Royal Domi. Only crash if it never recovers. Yeah, interestingly, I always like to look at the from a macro perspective at the Japanese stock market, how it performed after 1990 roughly. And, it took so long for that to recover, which really was interesting because sort of the common wisdom is always, on average, stocks are always going up. And for the US, that has been the case, at least for 100 years or something. But for Japan, maybe it's now at that level, but like it took 30 years or something to recover, which is terrible, right? SPY is below average. So, okay, I'm just going to end the poll quickly so that we can move on. The Sion says it should be a 4.8. I'm going to end it. And is it too high? Yes. 55% of people says it's too high. So, I said a 5. So, it's a 4. Financial markets is a 4. My pen's running out. 4. Financial markets is a 4. Terrible year for financial markets. So, that's it. Whoops. Let's look at all the numbers again. So this was the review. So we're now nearing the end of the review section of this live session. Financial markets, a 4, terrible year. Real GDP is 6. Still bad year. Okay, we want to see a 7 at least. Unemployment, an 8. Underappreciated. Hopefully your main takeaway from this, if you're at the Christmas dinner perhaps, or some other dinner with friends, or you're at a party, hopefully New Year's party. Actually, if they're being gloomy about the economy, talk about unemployment. Better than most people think. Inflation's still a 5. Inflation was the big bad Betty this year. Ruined the party. All right. That's so on average. What's it on average? I'm going to get in trouble. Not so great at this kind of stuff. I need to give them weights anyway. I would say on average, and this is not a properly weighted average, that's a 6. The global economy. No, let's put it at 5.5 because inflation was really terrible. That is not a good year, as most of you agreed to. And yeah, that sucks. So that is the main part of this video out of the way. So we've looked at the main stories of 2022. We've reviewed the year on these macroeconomic indicators. And now let's do a Q&A. If you want to stick around. Otherwise, feel free to leave. But this is an open Q&A now. And then we're just only have Happy Holidays wish left. So I can turn the camera to me. Hello, everybody. Let's shoot me some questions. Okay, Kaku says, too many papers, too few glasses of dry scotch. Yes, I have a glass of tea. Trying to set a good example. Dry scotch, it's been a while since I've enjoyed a good glass of dry scotch. Maybe I should try it again. This one time I actually got a bit sick from whiskey. This has been a while to return. Here in Belgium, I really enjoyed all of these great Belgian beers, but not too many of them, of course. But my goodness, that was one of the highlights of my year, to enjoy a good Belgian beer in peace on the sofa with a good friend, talking economics. Okay, some question. Okay, I have a name that's difficult for me to pronounce, but it says, what's your opinion on the Dutch farmer protests? So this is also something that I wanted to maybe make a video about, but didn't get around to it. So for those of you not in the know, in the Netherlands, there were actually quite big farmer protests because, the Netherlands basically wants to get rid of some of its farmers. Which is crazy to some people because you were having this food crisis throughout the year. And so many people were also saying like, this is crazy in the food crisis, but let's put a bit of nuance here. This was all about not CO2, but stikstof, for which I forgot the English name at the moment. So maybe someone in the chat will help you out. Nitrogen? Anyway, which is bad for nature areas, and there were too many, and it was all about meat and milk farmers, so it was about mostly about animals. So the argument there I didn't find so strong, like we need food. No, we basically mostly need plant-based food in a food crisis, so that was not a big argument, but one part about this, which I think is underappreciated, is that the Dutch government, didn't communicate about this properly. They were forced to do this in court by environmental activists, for understandable reasons. But then a lot of these farmers farming is a hard business, and you invest a ton of money. It's very slim margins, and you then in a poorly communicated way get told like, hey, you've invested for all of these years in your business, and you don't have so much income, even though a farmer is wealthy. They often have a lot of debt. It's not like they have access to that wealth per se immediately, and it's a way of life. And now, it's you have to stop. So I can understand why they were very angry. Let's put it like that. For a more informed opinion, I would have to do a full video. I would have to do more research because these are very touchy subjects. I want to do them justice. So I'm not completely, I don't have a full opinion on it, but I can understand at least why they were angry. I think the communication there and the planning was really bad by the Dutch government. Of course, some of these protests also got out of hand and were not always conducted in a classy manner. Trying to stay a little bit diplomatic to avoid any. I just shouldn't have a super strong. I typically try to not have a super strong opinion on stuff that I didn't research too well. Okay. So this is what Kakul says. Farmers are wealthy in assets, very poor financially in income, right? Okay, any more questions? Outlook for China for next year. It depends on the government action. So it really depends on what they will do, how much stimulus they will give. So far, they've given the impression that they don't want to completely reinflate the bubble, and they've given the impression that they cannot do the structural reforms needed. Structural reforms, a very vague term often used in economics to mean all sorts of sometimes very controversial things. But what I mean here is that they have this economy that's built to build all of these huge flats, roads, trains, houses. That was very useful at the start, not so useful anymore. And then it's very much export based. So investment-based and export-based is what economists call that typically. Chinese leaders know this. They want to shift towards a more consumption-based economy, more high tech, more service. But so far, it seems like they don't have the will to actually do measures that really do that. So they say they're going to do it, but so far they haven't really done that, and they always reverse back to reinflating the property bubble further. So my outlook, and then they have this huge demographic issue that as a result of the one-child policy, that there are many, the population is seemingly shrinking. I've also read some indications that the population statistics are not fully reliable, so they may be already shrinking. So I still think the Japan scenario is the most likely. Big stagnation and at a lower level than Japan, which is important for the people in China, which is not good news. But maybe they know that this is a problem, so maybe they will do the right policies. But then they also seemingly are getting more authoritarian. And then, as we've now seen in Russia, that, slowly, if you surround yourself with only people that tell you what you want to hear, maybe not great for governance and the right policies in the long run. Macroeconomy is a super tricky, huge system. Very difficult to run properly on your own as a strong person. Strong man is what they would say. So I'm not super optimistic. I think it will stagnate further, maybe even decline a little bit. All right, Kaushabalai, sorry if I butchered the pronunciation again, is India's decade for growth. I've seen quite positive, numbers are positive, more and more positive articles from people that I follow, but I need to do more research on this. I don't know yet enough about the Indian economy. I really should do a deep dive. Cautiously optimistic. Okay, let's see. So, question, obviously by Mikos. Obviously, there more money created by banks than money printed by central banks. How much impact do you think money printing has on inflation compared to overall money creation? So that's really tricky question, because money printing, it's not always clear what people mean by it. How I interpret that is create money by a central bank, or maybe even if private banks create it, but it comes from the government, and it has to end up in the hands of the people. What I would say is money printing, because they have to do it to pay their bills, and then it would be inflationary if it's not used to grow the economy. That makes sense, right? So that happens from time to time. It happened in Sri Lanka, in some of these hyperinflation countries. It happens during COVID pandemic. It actually happened a little bit in advanced economies as well. Arguably, even the huge fiscal spending during the COVID pandemic I would say that is money printing. It's closest to money printing, much more money printing than quantitative easing is, because, even if they don't do it through the central bank, they do it through banks. Banks create money to facilitate, to lend to the government. That's very close to money printing, right? How inflationary will it be? Well, it depends. I think if you're inside a lockdown situation where your capacity to make stuff is severely constrained, it makes sense that it contributes to inflation. If you do it in a way that grows the economy, it's not inflationary, but that's very difficult and maybe takes time. So I can understand it's on average inflationary. So yes, proper money printing, is necessary to grow an economy sometimes. It is still probably slightly inflationary, but it's very rare in advanced economies. Rarely sort of what people like Ray Dalio talk about in this very simple terms, money printing. They're just... they're going to print money and then they're going to devalue their currency, how they used to do it in the 17th century. We just don't live in an economy anymore, because most money that central banks create is only used as interbank money between banks. So you need the private sector then to follow, and that doesn't always happen. Okay, Daniel Coxeel says, Joeri, any thoughts on demographic change happening around the world? A lot of baby boomers approaching retirement age, especially in Europe, which will affect the economy. Yes, I think you already saw this in the US. There, the unemployment rate is fairly low, and it's shot. But more interestingly, the labor participation rate, so how many people of your population are in the labor force really dropped. And what I read about this mostly is that a lot of these baby boomer generations, or a big generational wave, thought, you know what, with this COVID wave, I'm just going to quit early. And so there's this theory by Professor Goodhart and an Indian economist whose name I just forgot, but I mentioned in my inflation video. Their theory is that this will be inflationary because you have this reduction in the labor force, and this aging generation is going to spend the money they saved. So if that's true, it should see like pressure on asset prices to go down further, and inflationary pressure. But that might also be good for that we have lower unemployment for longer now, if that is true. I think it's a convincing hypothesis. We haven't seen it in Japan yet, but they maybe outsourced a lot of that work, is what these professors are saying. Yeah, it's a convincing hypothesis, but I'll need to dive more into the demographic stuff a little bit, to be honest. It's not my specialty, financial economics, more where I came from. But I always do most of my research for all of these videos. Okay, Gary says, do you think AI can help the global economy? I started using this chatbot, ChatGPT, to help me sort of rewrite 1 or 2 paragraphs. I was mildly impressed. The writing was good, but it clearly didn't know what it was talking about very well. So it was only mildly useful. But that being said, I've seen some of these AIs do animations, and so I think it definitely contributes to this process of what economist Schumpeter calls creative destruction, which is all about sort of the economy sort of getting rid of the old industries and building new ones, and then thereby growing the economy, because as a whole you become more productive, and so as a whole you have more stuff. Right, and this is also why I would say GDP could potentially grow, even if we have finite resources. And the AI revolution is definitely one of the coolest things I've seen so far. Unexpected, because I thought after the deep learning stuff with them defeating Go and doing really cool stuff in games like StarCraft, but then I saw it like stall out a little bit, but now to see it continuing this innovative, I can definitely see it contributing to economic growth for sure. Yeah, very cool development. All right. What are your thoughts on the debt to GDP ratio? It's still high, but especially in a country like China, but maybe if inflation ends up maybe coming down, but not going back to deflation, so we have permanently higher prices, because energy prices and food were maybe the ones that contributed most this year, but wages, I don't believe in this wage price spiral, that it should spiral out of control, but wages are likely going to catch up, and that would contribute to inflation for longer. And also you can see it now already here in coffee shops, that they're charging higher prices because of higher energy prices, which makes total sense because that's a huge input cost. So it makes sense that inflation is going to be broader. Now, that would contribute to more inflation next year, but would mean that the debt is more manageable. So the debt to nominal GDP ratio, of course, wouldn't really matter, but the debt to real GDP ratio would go down because of this. That could be. So, okay, Gaspard says, can you make a video looking at the economic and macro impacts of strikes? So I do have to take into account a little bit also what people are looking for, and I haven't seen too many demand for that, let's put it like that. But what I try to do now often is, if there is an economic case, or I try to put some theory in that country, like country analysis, for example. So maybe if something happened where we see a lot of strikes, I can tie it into that, because it is an interesting subject. All right. Okay, so Shung says, if I pronounce it correctly, how should most people store money during a recession? Crypto, kidding. Have a look at some. I think Plain Bagel made a video about this. He's a professional investor that's honest, in my opinion. Check that out. That's a better source than me at the moment for this. All right, so I don't see so many questions coming anymore, and I think this has been a good review session. And with that being said, thank you so much, all of you, for joining me here reviewing the global economy in 2022. Thank you so much for supporting the Money Macro channel by watching and by subscribing, and some of you also by being patrons or members. Really helps me out a lot. My plan for next year is to try and release, my goal would be 2 videos per month, but it's very tricky for me, and then 1 live stream. That's what I hope. But around March, this is really nice, I likely am going to be a father, so it could be that you're going to be missing me for a month or something, or maybe longer depending on how it goes. So I'm really looking forward to 2023 for that reason, but I'm going to try to become more consistent. This is my goal: 2 videos per month and 1 interview. And then I've been working on a course, monetary economics. I want to make this subject more approachable, so in a Money Macro style with nice examples and as little jargon as possible. And that should come out next year. I've been working with 2 interns this year that have helped make a lot more possible than otherwise would have been possible. Oskar and Carlo, thank you so much for helping me out this year. And thank you, Hugo, for helping me out with the animations so much. And thank you all for the congratulation messages. I'm super happy about this as well. So looking forward to 2023. I hope the economy will get a better score at the end of 2023. And with that being said, thank you all so much. Hope you have a great holidays. And new video in 2 days about Turkey's economy. Last video of Erdogan really did some interesting moves there. Some geopolitical moves to stabilize the currency. Doesn't happen so much. Super interesting video. Go check it out and enjoy your holidays. See you next year.